In the chronicles of the historian Flavius Josephus, we find the kingdom of Judea at a precipice. We're looking at the reign of Queen Salome Lalacandra, a time that on the surface seemed stable, but was boiling with internal turmoil. This is where we see religious piety and state power become dangerously intertwined, and it really sets the stage for a conflict that would tear a family and an entire kingdom apart. So let's start with the question that really sits at the heart of this whole account. When the fervor of religious devotion is handed the sword of the state, does that line between righteous justice and, well, political revenge, does it just dissolve? This was the crisis that was confronting Judea. You see, according to Josephus, Queen Alexandra, a ruler of profound piety, she essentially ceded the day-to-day administration of her kingdom to a sect known as the Pharisees. Now, they were esteemed as the most faithful interpreters of the law, and because of that, they gradually took on the real power of the state. As Josephus puts it, they got to enjoy the royal authority, while the queen, she was left with all its burdens. And with that authority, a reckoning began. The tools of the state were turned not toward governing, but towards settling old scores. The first people in their sights were the allies of the queen's late husband, King Alexander. Their very first victim was a prominent man named Diogenes, a close friend of the former king. He was accused of having advised a past atrocity. The queen, who Josephus says was deeply superstitious, consented to his death, but his execution was only the beginning. Emboldened by this, the Pharisees then pressed her to eliminate their other adversaries, and the queen, bound by her piety, she complied. What followed wasn't just chaos. No, this was a systematic purge of the Judean aristocracy, and every single execution was sanctioned by the seal of the crown. Men who were once honored for their loyalty to the king were now condemned by this new power, and their deaths were cloaked in the legitimacy of the queen's own authority. But as this fear began to spread through the aristocracy, a resistance started to stir, not from some rival faction, but from within the walls of the royal palace itself. So you have the leading men of the kingdom, and they can sense their own doom is coming. They didn't go plead with their pious queen. Instead, they sought sanctuary with her younger son, Aristobulus. In him, they didn't see piety, they saw power. They didn't see superstition, they saw strength. Now, Aristobulus's response here, it's really a masterclass in political calculation. He didn't challenge the charges against these men or question the Pharisees' authority, no. Instead, he appealed to his mother's respect for status, arguing that the dignity of these men made execution unseemly. Exile, he proposed, was a much more fitting punishment, and his counsel worked. The condemned were scattered, their lives spared by a prince's very shrewd intervention. This one act just perfectly illuminates the stark contrast between the two royal heirs. On one hand, you have Hyrcanus, the elder. He was the designated high priest, but he was a man of a quiet, inactive temperament. And then you have Aristobulus, the younger. Though he was technically a private citizen, he had what Josephus calls a warmth of temper, a fierce ambition that was just waiting to ignite the kingdom. So you can see that Judea was balanced on a knife's edge. You've got a queen ruled by others, an heir who seems unwilling to rule, and a prince just waiting for his moment. And that moment, it wouldn't come by force of arms, but by a sudden weakness at the very heart of the kingdom. It's really ironic, isn't it? As Judean armies are winning victories abroad, the queen's health fails at home. Alexandra was struck by a grave illness. The center of power, which was already hollowed out by her piety, was now facing a total collapse. This was the moment Aristobulus had been waiting for. With absolutely stunning speed, he rallied his allies, and in one single audacious move, he seized control of every fortress in the kingdom. Using their treasuries, he raised a private army of mercenaries. And then, while his mother was still lying on her deathbed, he declared himself king. And what about the rightful heir Hyrcanus? Well, he could only watch, completely powerless, as his inheritance was stolen right out from under him. His only response was to appeal to his dying mother, a queen whose authority by now was nothing more than a memory. And so, the reign of Queen Alexandra drew to its tragic close. It ended not with the peace her piety had sought, but with the conflict her choices had sown, a legacy of division that was going to haunt the kingdom for years to come. From her deathbed, the queen made one last desperate grasp for power. She ordered the imprisonment of Aristobulus, his wife, and his children in the fortress of Antonia. It was her final and ultimately futile attempt to punish her rebellious son by holding his family hostage. Her reign, which had lasted for 9 years, had seen both peace and expansion. But now, it was over. But death came too swiftly. Josephus tells us that Alexandria died before she could enact any kind of punishment on Aristobulus for disinheriting his brother. Her final gambit failed. Her sons had succeeded.
So think about where things stand. The queen is dead. The rightful heir has been completely sidelined. The ambitious usurper now commands the armies. The stage was set not for a peaceful transfer of power, but for civil war. The question was no longer if brother would fight brother, but simply when.